for anybody who, we all have to probably say something, you know, accept the responsibility of being recorded here. And so we have a couple of things. Let me just open up our agenda here. I think Amanda actually is, I don't know if she's got COVID or if she's just got the flu. She's not joining us today, so we may not be as totally organized as we have in the past. But hopefully she'll be back next week for us, with us here. So we have a couple of new people on the call here. We'll do some introductions for folks like we usually do, just a chance to say hello and see who's on the call. One of our new participants here will actually be presenting next week, and I'll ask Michael to introduce himself as we get started on there. We have a couple of items we're going to go through. Even despite that she was ill, she was able to get the news. Do some research and get the news out there. A couple of interesting things on the news announcements. I was particularly, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but Oracle buying Cerner for a cool $30 billion. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but consolidation with Oracle in the space. I don't know if anyone has involvement with either of those, either Cerner or Oracle, has any insight into what their plans are, except to aggregate, and maybe they'll buy Epic too and just have one provider.
Well, Cerner is the Department of Defense and VA's EHR, so there are probably implications in terms of sales into federal government or trying to join forces in that sense across Oracle's product lines.
Right, right.
I read an analysis that this was also a play for Oracle to get more deployments on their online web services.
Oh.
Their equivalent of AWS and Google and Microsoft Azure.
Yeah, it's interesting there. The first article here from Reagan Stripes, I read that article. It was interesting from a consent perspective. I believe it was fairly narrow, but it looked like it had some saliency to the work we were doing. It was a small project, but it looks like it actually has potential expansion capabilities. I don't know if anyone else was aware of that or read it more closely from Reagan Stripes, but they've been generally pretty, thoughtful in this space. So,
So I haven't read the article, but I have heard from past research work that I've done that type of privacy preserving mechanism, at least with regards to matching, doesn't produce a successful matching match rates and other things like that. So I don't know if when you talk about things that might be cross-cutting with consent and other areas, think about things like that too, because I think it relates to the reason why I think it relates to not being able to, I guess, at least with demographic data, leverage certain types of data and other things. So that's just an FYI. And of course, what I'm referencing is probably older information, and I haven't read this article, so I don't know if it addresses that.
Yeah, I scanned it quickly. I can't recall it specifically to that, but it did have that connectivity there, and it was kind of in alignment with where we were headed. It had sort of had a second phase to it as well. The other article that actually the University of Texas on there, I guess this is the LEAP grant, and the next step on what they're going to be doing with that. What I don't know is whether or not they're going to be building off of the results from San Diego or not, but it sounded sounded like an appropriate next step in terms of looking at integrating across social healthcare and other areas. Brian, anyone else familiar with that piece?
I did, in reading through that article, I discovered it buried in it a reference to the HIE that they're using, whose name at the moment is escaping me. And I dug deeper into that HIE. It's been around for a couple of decades.
Mhm.
You know, it's a very regionally focused HIE. And they were talking about extending their existing relationships with community service providers to kind of provide this additional social services and healthcare integration. So apparently they've already been doing a lot of the kind of SDOH gravity project referrals between their community healthcare providers and their community social service providers.
The HIE is named ICC. It's the Austin HIE. Its origins are with the Federally Qualified Health Center there in Austin. And then it's going to migrate over to New Orleans, the New Orleans HIE.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Austin's only got 2 hospitals in it. So, I mean, to Brian's point, it's got its roots in the Federally Qualified Health Centers there in Austin.
Isn't this the group that presented to Unify recently with the Dell Medical Center?
Yes.
Okay, I was
confused. And the gentleman, I think that presented to us, Lil Oliveira, he was just admitted to Owens. He's part of ONC High Tech now too, as well. So it was good for him. So Austin and Dell Medical School are going to have a lot more influence, it seems like.
Eric, thanks for reminding us.
I was sketching out. I thought I was in the Twilight Zone, but no, we're not.
Well, it does seem like we are in a bit of the Twilight Zone. Before we dive into a couple of our project updates, I did want to ask a couple of our new folks on the call here to just say hello and do a quick introduction. So Michael Liebman, we met recently, and he'll be actually presenting next week on the call with some real interesting stuff he's doing around systems work. So Michael, would you just give a 2-minute kind of welcome, hello, and what you're up to?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel, and thanks for the opportunity to join with this group. I'm trained as a theoretical chemist, but have never practiced chemistry. I have a mixed academic commercial background. I was global head of genomics and computational biology for Roche. I ran a breast center for the Department of Defense jointly with Walter Reed. And what we do is basically disease modeling from the clinic back, where we're interested in understanding the complexity of the patient, the complexity of the disease, and the complexity of how medicine is actually practiced. And I have a small group called IPQ Analytics, and we work internationally with pharma, payers, government agencies, physicians, and other providers.
Thanks. And the conversation we want to have again next week is really focused on, sort of that systems kind of thinking. And what are we not there? The unknown unknowns or the known unknowns? How do we get our arms around that, especially as we think about SDOH and kind of the complexity of that world? So I thought it was great to get that perspective. So thanks, Michael. Michael Corbin, I think it's been a while since you've been with us. Again, apology if I don't remember that correctly.
I was here last time. I was new last time with New Wave, Aaron Seib, Greg Harris, and I are starting up what we're calling Saffron Labs. We're building off the Sapphire platform, which we built largely for the patient access CMS mandate, and are attempting to think through the technology necessary to do the closed loop referrals in a more universal way. And looking forward to doing the HL7 Connect-a-thon here. I think it's next week. And preparing also for the Gravity Projects Connect-a-thon, and also at the, we hope to have something built out to demonstrate at the HIMSS Interoperability Showcase in March. Largely trying to build the pieces collaboratively with the community, so that we can kind of build a reference architecture, or at least move in that direction. Thanks for having me.
That's great. Anyone else participating in the Connect-a-thon next week?
I don't know the whole list. There's a bunch of folks. Yeah.
Oh, there are. Yeah, I wondered if anyone else on the call here was
Oh, yeah.
engaged in that. Okay. Well, great. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And welcome to the conversation. We had, I'm going to ask a new addition to the agenda here. I'm going to ask Pooja just to do a quick overview. We had a meeting yesterday with, was that yesterday? Or, yeah, just Tuesday, right? Come on, it's like a long time ago already. With the ONC, kind of a follow-up to an earlier meeting on e-consent, and it kind of ties in with what we're going here. So I graciously accepted just do a quick overview of that, and then we'll dive into the other Project Unify status updates, because I think it has a lot of relevance to what we're doing here.
Sure. Yeah. So quick update. The meeting, as Daniel mentioned, was a follow-up with HHS, folks from HHS and ONC. I think Stephanie sits in on this meeting. Mary Kratz has joined as well from the Interoperability Institute. They are putting together this MELD sandbox. It's basically kind of a proving ground, a testing space with synthetic data, and folks can use that to test applications. You can import smart on fire applications to do testing in their environment. And you mentioned that HL7 Connect-a-thon. I know they've taken kind of their MELD sandbox to a couple of the Connect-a-thons as well for folks to use. But I didn't attend the first meeting, but I know there was a meeting with HHS with actually Steve Posnack and I think a couple other folks. Why can't I think of his name, Daniel?
Well, Stefan was
Stefan, thank you.
Yeah.
Stefan Kanya. And so, the outcome of that was to actually be able to show what the MELD sandbox could do, and then just also kind of share where we were at. So it was a great meeting. We were able to also share an update on the scan that we did. So we talked a little bit about that. The Interoperability Institute talked a little bit about the MELD sandbox. And really what we're trying to kind of pull together, there's so many different things happening around e-consent. And, I know what the Interoperability Institute is also thinking about is there a way to build kind of a community of practice around e-consent? So, get the folks that are all playing in this space to kind of get together. I mean, very similar to this Project Unify, but, a little more focused on just e-consent, not all kind of the other activities more on the healthcare space. And so, the ask from ONC HHS was to consider having folks attend, and be part of that community of practice around e-consent. I know we've had ONC HHS folks on these calls as well. So just kind of an extension of what we're doing here, bringing in additional folks. I think the meeting went really well. Next steps are to kind of make a little more formal ask to get someone to start joining that e-consent community of practice. I know as Point of Care partners, we're also just trying to get a better understanding. The scan was kind of a great starting point to say what's happening, best practices in the e-consent space, what's happening. But we're also now trying to get our arms around just all the different activities that are going on and see if there's a way to get folks to kind of be a little more hands-on. And similar to what we're talking about here at this meeting is what's going to happen in 2022, because I think kind of all these efforts are going to start coming together. We were originally focused on advanced care planning through kind of the Interop Institute and what we were doing there, but now just considering how can we also incorporate other activities as well. So questions, looks like Matt has his hand up.
Yeah, could you say more about what you mean by a community of practice and under whose auspices that would be? Would that be under ONC or the NIC or Project Unify?
Yeah, right now it's I think it's Interop Institute, you know, under the kind of their umbrella, but you know, I don't think it's fully been defined. You know, Mary Kratz has done a nice job of kind of talking a little bit about this MELD sandbox. How do we use that? You know, get people that are starting. So for an example, right, all the stuff that you guys are thinking about doing with Nick, is there a way to bring that kind of into this community of practice and say, here's what we're learning to share with others? So it's a little bit of we're trying to get our arms around exactly what that means, you know, how that would all work. But that's kind of what we're thinking is, you know, it would be a little bit broader. ONC would participate, you know, others would participate. You know, it'd be great to have Project Unify kind of in that as we start thinking about, you know, how we start piloting things. Can we bring, you know, lessons learned to a broader community of practice as folks are thinking about e-consent. So kind of early stages right now.
Mm-hmm. And would the focus of the community practice be e-consent within healthcare or e-consent within healthcare and the human service SDOH component as well?
Yeah, I think right now it's the e-consent within healthcare, but I know, you know, Daniel, we've been talking to you guys about maybe making that more broadly. You know, there's other community of practices that are kind of falling under this umbrella. I think they're looking at like a pharmacy-based one. So, you know, I think, you know, I think it's good to start with kind of one or two use cases. I know, and I don't know if there's anyone on from BPM Plus, but I know, you know, one of their use cases that they're looking at e-consent is specifically around advanced care planning. And so that's one that we're thinking would be a great use case. You know, the NIC stuff would be a second great use case that could expand it beyond healthcare. So I think it's kind of open and, you know, we'd love to kind of talk to more folks. I think we're going to, as point of care partners, be reaching out to a few folks just to kind of get a better idea of what's the need out there. You know, what are the thoughts? Because I think right now it's kind of, again, in early stages thinking about this, but is there a way to bring, you know, to kind of develop this community of practice as we start getting more hands-on with the e-consent and the utility and all of that? So.
One of the healthcare areas that I think we might have, we only kind of briefly touched on in the consent scan was this area around consent for minors to allow their parents to see their medical records.
Yeah.
And there was a paper that I'll share with Daniel to circulate or something.
Okay.
And it's basically like a mini version of the consent scan, but it's exclusively focused on all the different exceptions within the state of New Jersey, just for accessing patient medical records from parents and their minors. And when does the minor have to provide consent? And that's a very interesting area and something we're focused on, obviously, in New Jersey. But
yeah, that's a great one. And I know, you know, we've kind of tossed around the idea of you know, behavioral health, but, you know, even this idea for minors is a great idea. So yeah, if you could share that, Matt, that would be
sure.
great. You know, and like I said, I mean, we're kind of looking at what we're doing here at Project Unify. We're looking at BPM Plus. We're looking at what's happening at HL7, just to kind of get an idea of what's out there. And is there a way to say, okay, can we bring folks together? You know, we can have synthetic data is now available. Is there a way to, you know, kind of share those best practices and learning? So
That's a really good example of trying to kind of keep the scan sort of fresh. You know, being able to add stuff to it. We haven't figured that out exactly yet.
yeah,
How to do that, or I think when Samantha gets back, we'll take those kinds of things and add in an addendum. I'm not sure if it's best to do that on Google Doc or you know, to set up a SharePoint set or some other place where maybe just on the hub for that matter. It's a good place to put it. Just there's so many things that are happening.
yeah.
You know, everything will get stale in 3-4 months, you know, or 6 months if we don't kind of keep it up. And there's a lot happening. So thanks, Bridget. Yeah, and you know, we've been in this conversation about how do we bring the social SDOH stuff into other e-consent. As usual, you know, healthcare just is because it is so big and there's so many moving parts that it tends to dominate, you know, the conversation. So continuing to sort of wave the flag and make sure that we're able to bring, these other areas in as we're thinking about it. And particularly with ONC, right, and HHS, where they've got to support that. Otherwise, it's just not going to, it's just, it'll be our efforts or individual jurisdictions who choose to do that stuff. So, we're still hopeful that we're going to do some kind of, consent workshop sometime in the first quarter to be able to share what we've learned and kind of maybe there's broader perspective, but we're waiting to get some more feedback from ONC on that. So thank you for that, Pooja, and I think we'll keep tabs on what that looks like going forward. So with that, we have a few Project Unify status updates, and then we'll dive into the other topic around user stories. And hopefully Jim will be able to join us. So Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about child welfare? And then Eric, you're on. Great, you're still here.
I was gonna, bet this one or throw this one to Adam if he's on.
Yes.
Hi. It's not a long story, and we are working. Brian took the mantle at first, and still is the partner. Sorry, I just ran up and down the stairs, so I'm a little breathless here. So the short version is that we're trying to stand up this group. We think we will, we can. We have a game plan, which what we've been doing is looking for subject matter experts to inform the discussion to make sure that we're on track and that whatever use cases we devise are really, the ones that we need to address. And so I came up with the idea, for those who don't know, which is probably most people, wearing my non-consultant hat, I also had an organization called the National Center on Adoption and Permanency, NCAP. And so rather than sort of fish around for, do we have a expert who knows this and an expert who knows that, I volunteered NCAP as sort of a body of experts. We have about 20 some consultants working with me, with us, across a lot of disciplines across the country, in policy and practice, in research, etc., in various aspects of child welfare. And so we will, I don't know what we'll call it yet, partners, collaborators. I will bring in NCAP, and then we'll have access to a pretty broad variety of people, of a broad variety of expertise to inform the work. And we were going to meet, I don't remember the dates offhand, Brian, you probably have them. We were going to meet next week. We had a tentative meeting to start this thing up. But with the advent of this idea, we need a little more time. Plus, Brian has a scheduling conflict. Anyway, the bottom line is we're rescheduling to the week after next, I think. Is that right, Brian?
Yes, the 18th at 1 o'clock.
Right, and I need to send out a notice, a calendar invite, which I will do. And so if anybody on this call certainly wants to join that group, please let us know. You can do it in the chat or send either Brian or me an email or text. And that's it. I mean, we're really just getting started, but we have an MO now, and I think it'll be exciting to work on it together and see what we can pull off.
I keep pushing Adam in front of me and whispering encouragement in his ears.
You're doing a heck of a job. So I think we're making progress.
Anything for it to not be the all Brian all the time show.
No, and we obviously need, Brian's great at the technology and lots of other stuff, but I can bring something to the table that we really need.
Indeed.
Just as a kind of a sort of a short addendum to that, in terms of the importance of this particular domain and the work we're doing, is some also some recent interest from HHS and ACF and Children's Bureau. So I was was invited to participate in a roundtable looking at the intersection between child welfare and Medicaid, as well as data and data interoperability as a way to improve child welfare, particularly with a focus on prevention. That's coming up later in the month. I was excited. I was really excited about that. Particularly, they're interested in Unify. They're interested in the consent work. They're interested in how do you do data interoperability. And usually, our interactions are with ONC or CMS, CMMI. Here, it's directly with the Children's Bureau and ACF. So I may ask folks maybe next week or during that breakout meeting to sort of brainstorm a little bit on kind of what are the challenges and hurdles that some of you may be aware of or familiar with, or successes and models that are actually connecting the dots between child welfare and Medicaid and other services. So I think part of my excitement is that there's partially because I know some of the people there at ACF, pulling the social services, human services into these conversations always helps with a federal partner at the table, especially since our work generally gets sort of subsumed under ONC kinds of stuff, which is typically more healthcare oriented. So stay tuned to that. That should be coming up soon, and we'll have some more insight into that. And I hope that we can sort of engage some of those folks in some of these conversations as well.
And by the way, I'd also had interest in a early childhood domain working group from both the head of Child Care Aware of America and also from New Jersey Inc. So there's another one that in the fullness of time, we may be standing up something to focus on that end of the childhood experience. But one step at a time. Let's get child welfare stood up first.
Sounds great, Brian.
Eric, did you want to say anything about ontologies?
We had our meeting December, what was it, 17th? Or somewhere in mid-December. Our next one's February 18th. Last meeting was great. We had Mark Fox presenting on the city, well, there were multiple ontologies. Social and environmental impact ontology and the city data model standards. The notes, actually, I've got a link to the minutes from the meeting. And then Brian reported on the 119 ICFIS standards body meeting, and Robin reported the January 11th. So coming up is a regular meeting for the child welfare domain development. So that's ontology, right? As I understand it, Robin, or is it for the child welfare and just general domain?
So with the child welfare, I think we're shifting the leadership to Adam and Brian, and then trying to get a new group of domain experts is really the priority right now. So
got it.
Yeah.
So so those were so are you still doing the 11th meeting? Or Adam, do you know?
No, we're moving it to the 18th.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So I'll update my notes.
I'll send out an invitation briefly.
Okay. So we're looking for a new topic for February. We'll obviously have updates on all the other ones. So if somebody's doing some good ontology work, let us know. We might look at the sustainable development goals from the UN and how those tie into SDOH ontologies in development. And also we might also have an update on the core ontology that Brian is working on.
I should have something to present on core ontology by February.
And then I think NEAM is coming out with, with their meta model able to generate ontologies, RDF ontologies. So we'll have some NEAM products to look at soon. I've already seen some examples coming through the pipeline, but I'd like to see the whole shebang with an ontology for NEAM, so that we can actually use, as opposed to one that we can generate it if we so choose. I'd rather have it, done, generated, and then accessible. So those are all things we're working on. But that's my ontology update, and let Amanda know when she's back, or let somebody from the Stewards of Change group know if you want to join the ontology work group and attend the next meeting. Thanks.
Eric, you and I should have a chat in the fullness of time here, in the next day or two. I had an interesting conversation with Catherine Escobar, who's NEAM PMO.
Yes, Catherine is very much wanting some solid ontologies like we have in other areas. So I think that would be, hopefully that's good, some good news you got. So thanks all. I think that's the update.
I was just going to share gossip with you that I didn't feel like spreading to the entire world.
happy to chat offline.
I try to be tactful on occasion.
How mature. Any other relevant updates from folks before Brian? I don't think Jim is either. I don't think Jim is on the call for user story use cases. So that may be on your shoulders as we move into the next section here. But I didn't know Matt or Dave or other folks that anything going on that you guys want to share with us.
Well, Daniel, this is Dave. I've got a question, and I know I brought it up at a recent meeting. One of the questions is, do we intend to build a demonstration system that people can say, here is where I'm going to deploy my services, my capabilities to show how it works with others. So, what they're doing with Meld would seem like a good baseline for us to start adding capabilities to. So the question is, are we looking at having any long-lasting platform by which we can bring capabilities like consent to that platform? I guess that's a question for you, Brian.
You are a great straight man, Dave. I just popped into chat a Google Doc that, in fact, I wanted to use for this feature topic discussion. So, Daniel, may I share?
Yes, I think I gave you. So you should have the authorization for that. I just made you co-author or whatever.
No, I just need to find out. I'm trying to find out. Here we go. Trying to find the right window.
Okay.
Hopefully you all can see a page called Nick Project Unify 2022 Planning.
Yep.
This is the Google Doc that I dropped into the chat. You should all have access to it. So feel free to hack at or whatever. But the first thing I did, this was more for context for people who are coming in fresh to Project Unify demos, was list the 3 demos that we did in 2020 and 2021. The next thing was, I just wrote down some general thoughts on demos. This is a start for us to write down our hopes, our dreams, our expectations for how we want to go about doing this. And the very top one was, should we deploy on the interop.community Meld? The folks at the Interoperability Institute were very kind, very supportive to us in our previous demos. And interop.community is kind of their new thing. And I would assert that they'd be a good continuing partner for us to deploy on if folks feel that's appropriate. And Meld is their branding. We should get a presentation from them again on this at some point. But for a sandbox that includes a number of different open source software implementations, including, if I recall, a Happy Fire server that we've worked on before through for the Interoperability Institute, as well as they're standing up an instance of the LEAP CDS, San Diego's LEAP CDS consent service. So that comes along with them needing some user stories or use cases around e-consent that that stress some of the more interesting aspects. Right now, the interop.community e-consent community of practice, if I've deacronized everything in my brain properly, is really focused on advanced care planning for well, basically for elderly folk. And a lot of the work that we've been doing in Unify has been informed by the New Jersey and New York integrated care for kids stakeholders. So kind of the other end of the lifetime spectrum. And there's an opportunity for us to kind of jump in and either provide additional user stories and use cases for the existing e-consent community of practice, or for Unify itself to stand up and say, we'd like to be a community of practice in the interop.community environment. And of course, build open source and non-open source implementations running in that meld environment that can then be leveraged for both our user stories and demos and other folks' demos. So the final, and I guess before I get to that final comment here, I should ask the question that Dave has already, broken the ice on. Do we want to have a more formal relationship between Project Unify and interop.community? Either as in, sure, we'll come and play in the sandbox with you in general, or, hey, we want to have our own community of practice in interop.community. What do folks think? Stunned silence.
I got some thoughts, but I'd love to hear from folks. If you need more information, if you've got questions, if you think it's a good idea, bad idea as well, Brian.
Well, I think it sounds like just from what I remember from the Meld platform, it sounds like it's a really powerful and has a lot of opportunities for collaboration and intersection with Project Unify. I think in order to really fully respond, like better wrapping my mind around what it means to have a community of practice on Meld and what goes with that, and if there were user stories, for example, that used a standard that was not supported by Meld, it would just happen in the rest of Project Unify. So I guess those types of logistical and standards-based questions, and then also questions around like, is there funding for demonstrating use cases like around e-consent? Those would be the things that are kind of driving my question or thought process on these things.
I think Matt's being supportive. I would like to drive convergence. So we can use that platform versus standing up our own. I think that makes sense, since we can drive energy and greater participation in that manner. Maybe we can help get PP2PI on that. I know Rita mentioned that in the chat. So whatever we can do to drive convergence on the subject, I think is worthwhile. That seems to have a fair amount of energy and attention around it. So I would be supportive of getting on that platform.
And we'd have access to the same synthetic patient data, practitioner data, et cetera, that we had in the Interoperability Institute's environment. So it would be a continuation of our what we were.
You're breaking up for me, Brian.
My apologies. Bad internet up here in the reverbs. I would note that we need to do some more work on identifying an open source person matching or enterprise person master index or something along those lines. Dave, I know you guys had done some great work with sensing. Did they ever put that into a public domain? Or is that the patient matching work that you guys did with sensing still proprietary?
No, I think the core of it, there is a chunk of proprietary in there, but a very substantial point of it is open source.
Okay, it's something we should drive toward with sensing or potentially in parallel with sensing or something. And we also we're going to have the folks from the FIDO Alliance come and make a presentation sometime in the next month. They're open ID.
They're mostly about authentication, right?
Well, it's yes, about authentication and identity management. So OpenID Connect is one of the participants in the FIDO Alliance, OpenID being one of the sort of cornerstone technologies of Smart on Fire. So there, again, as Dan has pointed out, anything we can do to drive convergence in this space is good, especially how important Dan knows identity management and person matching is. And he's got his hand up. So Dan, over to you.
So thanks. Just thank you playing off the last discussion, but I'm a little confused as to the need and the requirement for open source person matching and why we're going down this path. So I sort of struggle with that, Brian, and I appreciate the commentary, but if the mainstream healthcare industry is not going to support some functionality, and I'd be reluctant to believe that the mainstream healthcare infrastructure would support open source person matching. I'm not sure why we're going down this path. It seems more divergent than convergent, at least based on what I know, which may not be enough.
I think there's a difference here between like a reference implementation and like a production competitor to an existing healthcare vendor or a human services vendor. So I think the goal usually with these kinds of things, because I'm with you, Dan, like we're not going to have the money to build out the whole darn thing that would compete and replace, what Cerner or Epic have. But what we could do is, have some minimal proof of concept that runs, and then new vendors in the space. It actually help the private sector, raise the tide of all ships, and they can, go from there with their own. But yeah, I hear your point, Dan.
My concern is less about whether it's open source or closed source as much as it is about how transparent it is about arriving at the calculations. How is it doing how can we be sure that this match is an accurate match, and can it be compared by some form of mathematical statistical milestone to other solutions out there, and not that one of these black box things that just ask you to trust them. So
I certainly appreciate the question, Matt, and that is a requirement, and that is one of the downsides of the current implementations. It's a real challenge, the requirement you're bringing up, Matt, to gain trust as to level of identity. But it really talks about, and Eric, I appreciate the desire to have this sandbox environment where these things can be tested. I'm okay with that, as long as we're not suggesting that we're gonna endorse some open source requirement for mainstream industry use.
I mean, there is like clear kind of, there is some statistical, research out there about, how many data points you need to match. And if you don't have that many data points, what is your statistical likelihood of the match being accurate? So we don't have to kind of reinvent the wheel. But, what I'm concerned about is solutions that come up with a metric like, something from between 1 and 100, and it's not, it seems like it's really confident, but it's like, you don't really know like what that metric really means. And it's not, kind of backed up by any kind of robust, non-biased analysis. So maybe that doesn't really exist in the industry. I don't know.
It's a tough one, Matt, because a big portion of the success of identity management has to be trust. And if we start undermining the trust in the identity algorithms, in the identity application, right? Medical records, doctors, caregivers, public health won't use it. So, again, I appreciate the question, and the question's well-founded. But by the same token, are we opening up a can of worms here that we can never, ever put back in the can?
Right. And we can also we don't have to trust closed source systems. We can test how good they do a match based on controls and stuff. It could be audited. So everybody knows I'm a big open source proponent, but I do feel the closed source offering can have its efficacy of its match algorithm tested without divulging the source code. So I see that we could separate the ability to trust a system from it being open or closed source.
I agree with you, Dan, that we're never going to replace what Epic has implemented or Cerner has implemented or Meditech or NextGen or whomever. They've got their systems. But one of the things that we're working on here in Project Unify is how do all of the social services, human services, education, Justice Department, child welfare, et cetera, vendors out there interoperate with the healthcare world? And none of those folks are going to be able to simply license what Epic has implemented or what Cerner has implemented. So we need to explore what mechanisms can those other kinds of software systems make use of in order to be able to negotiate patient matching with existing healthcare systems. And this is something that is so far outside the wheelhouse of most of these systems that we're almost starting from scratch. And that's where having an open source system where we can say, oh, by the way, if you're building a student information system and you want to be able to do student to patient matching with your local HIE, here's a common open source mechanism you can make use of to help deduplicate the data that you get back from the HIE against your student database.
Again, Brian, I understand the scope. We tried it in San Diego. Daniel's aware of this. ConnectWell San Diego, which was the County of San Diego application, was a colossal failure, largely because they couldn't do this. So again, totally appreciate what you're saying. It really just depends on the scope of activity. But when you talk about the scope as you presented it, given those legacy systems that are non-healthcare, that have their own challenges, their own standards, complications, their own workflows, you're almost trying to boil the ocean.
You pointed out that this is a critical item that we need to address if we're going to have common consent service utilities.
I still believe that.
Really go, It's too hard a problem now.
No, well, again, it depends on the scope. Again, I think health and wellness applications can be relatively well contained within a scope or workflows. So I think we'll get there. And I think there are solutions, and I really do think they're geographically based. They're not national.
Right. Is there a I think you might have said this already, Eric, but is there relevance, especially as we're thinking about developing these, these proof of concepts to actually demonstrate, perhaps with, the Insights, perhaps with other jurisdictions that are sort of starting to wave their hands, to be able to sort of from a lower cost or a low cost perspective, be able to model that, using MELD and using the other pieces, so that we can actually go do something without having to worry about buying and integrating sort of a proprietary system. Is that a right way to think about it?
That's one way, Daniel. That's one use of open source. But I think from the perspective of Project Unify, we want to engage closed source vendors, even the largest ones in the space that have established solutions.
Yeah.
And I work for one in the space we're in, we're one of the largest, or maybe the largest. But the point being is that, and it's closed source, but the point being that open source implementations from a Project Unify perspective, the main usage of it is to demonstrate and to illustrate how this can be done by companies that may wish to re-implement in closed source. And then, yes, I mean, there are other, once you have once the cat's out of the bag, whatever, yes, people can use this open source code because it's freely licensed for whatever they want. It's indeterminate how it will be used. They can extend it. They could make a huge collaborative about it and prove us all wrong. But I mean, just from, but the original scope of it is to show the pathway of what all needs to be considered, the requirements for such functionality. And then, yeah, somebody wants to make it production grade, go for it. They're gonna have to.
Brian, I think there's a tremendous opportunity, what you said, which is some sort of reconciliation and handoff from health and wellness, human services, to other workflows to reconcile identity. I think that's brilliant. If we could identify something like that and model that in open source, Eric, I think that'd be brilliant, right? But again, thinking about how, I mean, identity is basically PHI, and taking that outside the health and wellness workflow would be a real complicated legal manner.
Sure, and we already do PHI outside of health. It's just, you just don't want to kill the open source effort because healthcare is complicated and fraught with legal.
Agreed. Agreed. But by the same token, again, the number of transactions that are healthcare medically based are going to be the dominant amount of transactions. So anything that takes away from that utilization, I think, just detracts from what we're doing.
No, I don't think any application in human services outside of healthcare would at all detract from healthcare's progress. I don't think anything could slow it down from what I've seen. I mean, there's a massive amount of investment, and I think there's plenty of space for all the actors in here.
Daniel, then Chavez, what if we focused initially on school to healthcare provider, so like nurse's office even, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, Matt, we tried this in San Diego, and Daniel's aware of it, and he was actually helpful with some introductions.
Oh, great.
Through Stewards of Change. We tried working with Silicon Valley and Santa Clara County to make happen. It's a very complex workflow. It's almost, I can go chapter and verse on that workflow. We attempted it in San Diego. We made some great progress, but not complete.
It maybe like in a post-COVID world, or in a COVID existing world, not post. Now is the time to revisit that, because with contact tracing, with schools closing and cancellations, and all the resources and energy and money that is going into
totally appreciate the requirement.
Like I mean, like, you could, I'm trying to narrow. I'm like, if we can, let's keep FERPA, if you're staying on the school nurse, is that limiting can you limit the scope like you're saying? And maybe
So the answer is no, Matt. We tried it in San Diego. And believe it or not, Matt, as it relates to school nursing,
yeah,
we had to have a huge dialogue that involved lawyers and risk and compliance as to the definition of treatment in the school nurse setting. That's how crazy this got, Matt.
yeah, I'm just saying times might have changed because of the pandemic. I totally appreciate and understand that there, and I just had a conversation with an Ohio HIE that believes that they want to build that bridge too. So look, I mean, I'd love to learn more. Maybe you can do a session on what went wrong and, and present to everybody on all the different things, and we can learn from the things that worked and didn't work.
So I mean, that would be actually worthwhile. And maybe we could arrange that, because it was an incredible learning experience and not as straightforward as you would think.
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying it's straightforward. I'm wondering if there might be more willpower to tackle these things now than there were before, just because, we're going to heading towards 1 million people dying in this country. So that's all I'm saying. I don't, you understand this way more than I do. I want to be clear. I'm not claiming to be.
Matt, I think it's a great suggestion, and especially as we move a little more, hopefully smartly towards doing something, either as a proof of concept that we have the opportunity to learn from what went wrong, and what we should be aware of going into these kinds of kind of challenging situations again, that maybe we'll be fortunate. And to your point, Dave Walsh, yeah, we definitely want to demonstrate this. I think that, from my perspective, and check out this assumption, is that there's a window of opportunity right now. There's a moment in time where forces are coming together to be able to help us actually go do some of this, some concept work around consent. And so being able to bring those forces together in in as agile way possible would be really advantageous. And
yeah, so if I can just add something there, Daniel, I think open source is a vendor's decision to make, because I've had conversations with many states and so forth. Many of them don't want open source. They want to have one throat to choke, if you will, somebody who's responsible for the system. I think our opportunity that's in front of us right now provides us a context. And what I'm talking about is MELD. If we have conversations about the APIs or the interfaces within the system that we're building, we can have context, because that's one of the issues that we ran into with person matching, is what repositories are we starting to look at to find out if we've got matching people and so forth. So there needed to be a context. So what are the databases that we have access to and so forth? And I think something like MELD, I happen to have already been doing things on MELD, and hopefully we'll do the consent on there, certainly have done SMART on there and a number of things. But to me, it's important to have a context of how you're trying to put these pieces together, and that context has some level of stability. So this module that was invented last month doesn't go away on you. So we're all trying to build modules and solutions and solve the problems. I think we just need a stable context in which we're building those.
Hear, hear.
So the only thing that I wanted to bring up is that from my experience, I'm not up to date on where they're currently at in the strategic plan, but with a lot of the state-based registries, in contrast to the private platforms, there's a strategy and a national initiative regarding EPSDT. early periodic diagnostics, screening and treatment. And it started a long time ago regarding like having the vision that everything would be incorporated into one. So I think something to think about when you're building in a lot of these other things is trying to get an update where they are on that strategic plan, you know, because there's some of these categories are really special populations or uninsured populations or whatever, but there are certain registries like newborn screening, EPSDT, and different things like that, that everybody, regardless of their insurance status, you know, would be a component of it. And so, so thinking about how some of these other user stories would fit into that versus is it still trying to create a parallel system given the current state of the art of where they're at in their strategic plan?
Yeah, I think, you know, just in my mind, it raises the question of how do you make sure there's a sort of vertical integration, right? So the same data, lack of data interoperability. I mean, a couple of years ago, we did a project for HRSA and ACF looking at home visiting and early care and education, and EPSDD came through, and, you know, early care and education and, you know, CPS registries and stuff like that. Man, those fields are more fragmented than anything, right? In terms of the lack of data interoperability, specifically inside a government and from agency to agency. So I think that's a huge piece of what, you know, ultimately be able to make change would be useful to be able to bring them into the conversation as well.
Let's just circle back on these general thoughts. And really just to drive this point home so we can make a decision one way or another. Does anyone have an objection to Project Unify having a formal liaison with interop.community and requesting a Unify community of practice be stood up?
I don't have any concerns there. You know, I have already started going down the path of MELD. So do you see MELD factoring in there at all, Daniel or,
yeah.
or Brian?
Yeah.
If we're going to do that, we ought to be in for a penny, in for a pound.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it you know, it's right. I mean, for all the reasons we've talked about, plus, you know, it's been an evolving relationship for multiple years now. So
yeah,
and we're gonna need to be able to demonstrate stuff within a, you know, within a friendly context, right?
right.
Wherever we end up doing next sort of implementation.
Right.
So yeah,
you may have mentioned this already, but are we looking at any HIMSS presentations in the interoperability showcase? Because it seems to me that what we're doing is a really good fit for that.
You're on, Matt.
Okay. So I think it's worth announcing that so me, June, and OpenCity Labs have been participating in this Administration for Community Living challenge, social care referrals challenge. And we recently, so we're Team Firefly. And so we recently learned that we have won phase 2 and gotten into phase 3 with only 4 other teams. And the Gravity Project, their executives, they've invited us to demo our New Jersey Integrated Care for Kids social care referrals at the HIMSS Interoperability Showcase. And we're also being spotlighted on the ONC website and getting some other recognition. So there will be demos for sure. If Project Unify wants to do others too, it will, you know, so.
it's great. Congratulations. So a great outcome of great collaboration.
Thank
So,
you.
looking forward to that.
And scary as heck, but we will get there.
There was also, depending on where ONC ends up on consent, there was, and I don't know if this would be part of that or we could cobble it together, add a sort of an addendum to it. Stefan was particularly interested within demonstrating the the consent circle, so to speak, and what that might look like at HIMSS as well. So he's still on vacation, so I'm waiting to hear back from him about what's going to end up happening on that. But that may also be another sort of nice, either sort of next to or embedded in or connect to stuff that happens there. Dan, you had a question?
Excuse me. No.
Okay.
Sorry. That was a clap for Matt.
Oh, a clap. I thought it was a question. Great. Clap. Yes, Brian, I think we are, I think we can, sort of go back and, sort of affirm and confirm that we want to do that. So I think that's a good thing to do.
Right, Daniel, you're responding to a private message I sent to you. I have no objection to it being shared publicly, but I just want to let you know that the other folks don't have context for what you just said.
Yeah, no, I was referring to the context that you had raised, which was that, are there any objections to sort of pursuing that? And I didn't hear any. So I think that plus your private note sort of suggests that, as we've been doing, moving forward on that. So I think we can sort of affirmatively sort of move in that more forcefully in that direction, which again may have applications to both New Jersey, potentially New York, California, Colorado, those other places. So hooray, hooray. It's great.
And let's hear it for alignment, coalescence. Dan, what did you use as a phrase? Convergence.
There you go. More convergence.
Okay, potential user stories and demos. This is just brainstorming. It was originally triggered a couple of weeks ago by a suggestion, a request that Jim St. Clair made I think it was at the ontology working group meeting, where he said, we really ought to get serious about talking about user stories. What is it that we want to be able to demo in the next year or so? So this list here on the screen is not the list of things we will do, because there's way too much on the plate here. But just some explorations of what kinds of demos might we do for interoperability between specific information domains, the bold stuff, the bold items on the left-hand side of these bullets. What that user story might be in very brief phrasing, and who are the stakeholders that might be interested in something like this. So I'll just run through them quickly, see if anybody has anything they would definitely not want to do, definitely want to do, or have something better that we should add to the list. We had a New Jersey Inc. actually under Dr. McCoy had long used the example of chronic absenteeism from school being a potential leading indicator for a chronic healthcare condition like asthma, or potentially a substance use problem at home, or some other chronic condition at the family level at home that might be dealt with as a healthcare problem. You don't just figure somebody's truant from school because they're lazy or hate school. Maybe it's because they've got asthma and just couldn't make it to school that day safely. So we know that New Jersey Inc. is one of those candidates. I also know from the comment Matt made earlier about Ohio that there's some folks in Ohio that are interested in similar kinds of things. Matt, I added in this new one just now as you were talking about contact tracing COVID alerts for school systems. as another potential user story. And the Inc. folks in Unify, as well as Ohio, are potential candidates for the contact tracing at the educational level. We have SEDS is the Common Educational Data Standards Organization, funded by the Department of Education, is standing up a new working group around early childhood education. Their first meeting, I think, is next week. And I think it's one of the reasons I couldn't go to one of the meetings somebody proposed to me. We also have had the nurses at the New Jersey VNA who are participating in Inc. raise the concern about early childhood health care and how different it is from general health care. And the Child Care Aware of America, which is a nationwide organization of affiliates of child care providers, also is very interested in this early childhood space and may be interested in joining Unify, by the way. I was thinking there might be a user story there, but as you see from the double question marks in brackets, I don't know what that user story is, and I'm not qualified to specify what that user story is myself. We have child welfare, and I'm rather hoping that our child welfare domain experts who we're going to bring on in this new child welfare group can weigh in to help us better understand what would be a good child welfare interoperability discussion. One of them might be child protective services or foster care, child alert or intake across systems. It might involve the homeless management information system world. It might involve other human services worlds. I don't know, but we know that New York Inc. is especially interested in this space, being better tightly coupled with their child welfare system than I think anybody else in the world is able to do.
Brian, can I
say
make
that-
a suggestion on this one? Maybe think about something less controversial, less fraught than, foster care.
You are B Inc.
Yeah. I
You
know.
are my stakeholder for this one.
Yeah, I know.
What would you suggest doing? And frankly, your current Inc. Interaction between the HIE and the New York City child welfare system may be a fine use case for us. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I agree with that. But that's an ambitious one. And I don't know, I'm just putting this out here, like WIC and SNAP or something like that. Food stamps or
Well, we could certainly do a WIC thing again. We did do a WIC demo. I think in November of 2020 was the Gravity SGH Food Insecurity WIC referral.
yeah.
But it wasn't specific to child welfare. It was based on a prepared survey.
Yeah.
Why don't I make this non-fraught and just put question marks there so that, because this doesn't have to be figured out today, but I want to plant seeds.
There's a lot more.
And fertilize you with enough BS.
This would be a very good subject to have to discuss as an opening gambit for the group that we're putting together and for the experts. What is something that's accessible, not overly controversial, because everything in that world is controversial. But is there some consensus that if we look at X, even people who think it's controversial will think it's worthwhile, as long as we reflect all those pieces. I'm not putting anything on the table. I'm just saying that, in fact, on the ground, maybe we can find something that fits the bill. Worth the discussion.
This is not a child welfare comment. I wanted to follow up on what Paul said. I think there's a lot of room outside of how we demonstrated the WIC referral. We could do a WIC referral over direct secure message, right? Could you make it easier for hospitals to immediately kind of refer and open the direct message? Or can you do eligibility on WIC? Could we look at based on existing Medicaid eligibility, right? Because you have automatic categorical income. I don't know if it's automatic categorical, but the point is there are a lot of different nuances about, especially around the intersection between WIC and Medicaid. I don't know if any of these ideas resonate with Paul, but.
Yeah, I just, let me just say, ACS is there are issues. There are lots of issues there, right? And I was thinking, could we do something with the education system, right? And also there are things there. We in Inc. we're trying to look to see about homelessness and seeing if homelessness and school attendance, can we bring information together on that? But these are, the issue about all of that stuff, it's very much kind of very marginal. And so could we do something much more general? It's really what I'm thinking about. And I don't have, the right thing. I mean, part of it even could be, different parts of the health system, like the early intervention system, OC, just some really just less challenging environments. We could think about this a little bit more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, part of this, part of what we may end up, depending on, again, resources and time and priorities and interests and part, if we're fortunate enough to be able to do something on consent, that takes center, that could take a center stage, and then we could be, sort of using, the synthetic data and MELD and demonstrating that capability in high risk areas, but we're not using real data, so it's easier to kind of demonstrate. I think that's one of the values of MELD is also if you can use synthetic data to show that it's a safe, secure transaction with all the protections and it's valuable. I think that's part of, and and it passed the attorney sniff test, the privacy officers. That may be valuable in and of itself, without actually doing, getting initially to the actual data exchange itself. Right. So, and I think that's the real benefit of working with MELD, because you're right, Paul, well, you can't get a cup of coffee out of those guys sometimes. No less, personal information, So that's what I think that maybe one of the trump cards is, so to speak, is actually being able to do that within a synthetic environment. Because then everybody can say yes and then poke holes at it until they say, well, it's safe, it's secure, we can do it, we can make rapid progress. I think that blows as opposed to trying to negotiate, a very narrowly defined thing, which we could do anyway if that's necessary. So I think it's just a different, another perspective on how we can sort of skin that cat, so to speak.
Yes. I mean, one thing that was just kind of rummaging through my mind is maybe health and school enrollment.
Right.
Just almost like yes, no answers.
Right.
You know, something really simple. Maybe you know, I can go off, but Head Start enrollment or you know, some other variation of that, right?
Would your perspective change if you could simulate it with synthetic data as opposed to actually sort of wrestling the agency down to the ground to get their data transfer?
That's part of the complexity, right?
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, look, we're now moving into double overtime. People are dropping out, which is very reasonable, I guess. It is 5:30. Brian, are there any concluding comments you'd want to make? I know we're going to sort of continue to work this with all the variables around.
I want to encourage everyone to that's interested to noodle on this, to update, to add to it, come up with better stories, better user stories for these demos. And I'd also like to point out the final one, justice. We do have some interest from the NEAM PMO to have us do something with NEAM. And the one area that we know, the one domain we know NEAM has a lock on is the Justice Department. And that includes, by the way, justice associated not only with juvenile justice, with what in New York State we used to call juvenile justice clients, because we weren't allowed to say juvenile delinquents or anything like that. But also associated with court orders for child support payments or delinquent child support payments, request to garnish wages, those kinds of things. That and so the question is there a good interoperability story that we can create having to do with the justice system and some other domain where we could demonstrate interoperability with NEAM?
So Brian, my experience now, which is granted very limited, is that when it gets to the justice system and well, at least for children and stuff like that, is that ACS is involved. So, you know, it's just a different side of ACS, right? But you know, we could put, one of the things that we could put in here, and something that I've been trying to do for a long time, is we could do health and homelessness, because it would be interesting to see if we could see who's in the shelter system.
Yeah.
Because you know, in my world, we have people with HIV and we can't contact them. And why can't we contact them? Because we don't know where they're at. And you know, we'd like to know if they were in the shelter system someplace, right?
Right.
That's great. Brian, the last thing I would say on the justice side is, you know, from the work we did with Pew on the civil engagement side, there's a lot there that is disconnected. Child welfare for sure, but also, you know, housing court, people are ending up at small claims court, child support enforcement. There's a lack of interoperability that I think could be beneficial to human services, almost on a preventive or proactive basis. If families are involved with court, or so, particularly, you know, civil court, that could be a, you know, sort of the red flag, or the, you know, that could be really important for other social and human services that are not connecting the dots there, and they're only seeing one part of the game.
There's a kinder and gentler word for the prospect of losing your housing other than eviction. Trying to remember what the phrase is.
Instability.
Well, that sounds good to me. Wasn't the word I was looking for, but it's good enough for now.
Okay, thank you. Let's, this is a great start. Thanks for hanging out. Great seeing everybody. I'm glad the year's starting and we're doing this. You know, hopefully we'll be able to augment our efforts as things go along. More news to come.
Bye, everybody.
With that, see you,
Okay.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Brian, I'm going to send, hang on one second. I'm going to